History of the World by J. M. Roberts. Book 8 The Latest Age. Chapter 1 Perspectives, Beliefs and Attitudes. Almost certainly, such a change owes less to exhortatory preaching, though there has been plenty of that, than to material changes whose psychological impact has everywhere helped to break up the cake of custom. In many places, they were the first comprehensible sign that change was in fact possible, that things need not always be as they had been. Once, most societies consisted mainly of peasants living in similar bondage to routine, custom, the seasons, poverty. Now, cultural gulfs within mankind, say, those between the European factory worker and his equivalent in India or China, are often vast. That between the factory worker and peasant is wider still. Yet, even the peasant begins to sense the possibility of change. To have spread the idea that change is not only possible but also desirable is the most important and disruptive of all the triumphs of the culture, European in origin, which we now call Western. Technical progress has often promoted such change by undermining inherited ways over very broad areas of behavior. As already mentioned, an outstanding example has been the appearance over the last 2 centuries of better forms of contraception, whose apogee was reached in the 1960s with the rapid and wide diffusions of what became, in many languages, known simply as the pill. Though women in Western societies had long had access to effective techniques and knowledge in these matters, the pill, essentially a chemical means of suppressing ovulation, implied a greater transference of power to women in sexual behaviors than any earlier device. Although still not taken up by women in non-Western world so widely as by their Western sisters, and although not legally available on the same basis in all developed countries, it has, through the mere spread of awareness of its existence, marked an epoch in relations between the sexes. But many other instances of transforming power of science and technology on society could be cited. It is difficult not to feel, for example, that 2 centuries changes in communication and particularly those of the last 6 or 7 decades imply even more for history of culture than, say, did the coming of print. Technical progress also operates in a general way through the testimony it provides of the seemingly magical power of science, since there is greater awareness of its importance than ever before. There are more scientists about. More attention is given to science in education. Scientific information is more widely diffused through the media and more readily comprehensible. Yet, success, paradoxically as in space, has provided diminishing returns in awe. When more and more things prove possible, there is less that is very surprising about the latest marvel. There is even unjustifiable disappointment and irritation when some problems prove recalcitrant. Yet, the grip of the master idea of our age, the notion that purposive change can be imposed upon nature if sufficient resources are made available, has grown stronger in spite of its critics. It is a European idea, and the science now carried on around the globe, all based on the European experimental tradition, continues to throw up ideas and implications disruptive of traditional theocentric views of life. This has accompanied the high phase of a long process of dethroning of the idea of the supernatural. Science and technology have thus both tended to undermine traditional authority, customary ways, and accepted ideology. Even when they appear to offer material and technical support to the established order, their resources become available to its critics. Clear ideas about what scientists do may hardly filter through to the public at large, But even if most of humanity rests undisturbed in traditional pieties and superstition, it is harder to stay in the familiar ruts. This is true not only for the intellectuals who are, of course, disproportionately prominent in histories of thought and culture, but of the inherited assumptions and prejudices with which most of us live. The second effect is more important in recent history than at earlier times because improving communication has pushed new ideas more quickly into mass culture than ever before, though the impact of scientific ideas on elites is easier to trace. In the 18th century, Newtonian cosmology had been able to settle down into coexistence with Christian religion and other theocentric modes of thought without much troubling the wide range of social and moral beliefs tied to them. As time passed, however, science has seemed harder and harder to reconcile with any fixed belief at all. It has appeared at times to stress relativism and the pressure of circumstance to the exclusion of any unchallengeable assumption or viewpoint. A very obvious instance can be seen in one new branch of science, psychology, which evolved in the 19th century. After 1900, more began to be heard of it by the lay public, and especially of the two of its expressions. One which eventually took the name psychoanalysis can be considered an influence on society at large, to begin with the work of Sigmund Freud, which had begun in the clinical observation of mental disorder, a well established method. His own development of this became, with comparative rapidity, notorious because of its wide influence outside medicine, as well as stimulating a mass of clinical work that claimed to be scientific, though its status was and is contested by many scientists. It undermined many accepted assumptions, above all, attitudes to sexuality, education, responsibility, and punishment. Freud's work was based on a belief that therapy could be pursued and relevant clinical data assembled by uncovering patients' unconscious wishes, feelings, and thoughts. This was to prove an inspirational gift to artists, teachers, moralists, and advertising specialists. Meanwhile, another psychological approach was that pursued by practitioners of behaviorism, like Freudian and psychoanalytical, a word often used somewhat loosely. Its root went back to the 18th century ideas and it appeared to generate a body of experimental data, certainly as impressive as, if not more impressive than, the clinical successes claimed by psychoanalysis. The pioneer name associated with behaviorism is still that of the Russian I.P. Pavlov, the discoverer of the conditioned reflex. This rested on the manipulation of one of a pair of variables in an experiment in order to produce a predictable result in behavior through a conditioned stimulus. The classical experiment provided for a bell to be sounded before food was given to a dog. After a time, sounding the bell caused the dog to salivate without the actual appearance of food. Refinements and developments of such procedures followed, which provided much information and, it was believed, insight into the sources of human behavior. Whatever the beliefs these psychological studies may have brought with them, what is striking to the historian is the contribution that Freud and Pavlov made to a larger and not easily definable cultural change. The doctrines of both were bound, like more empirical approaches to the medical treatment of mental disorder, by chemical, electrical, and physical interference, to suggest flaws in the traditional respect for moral autonomy and personal responsibility that lay at the heart of European moral culture. In a sharper focus, too, Their weight was now added to that of the geologists, biologists, and anthropologists in the 19th century who contributed to the undermining of religious belief. At any rate, in Western societies, the power of the old idea that things mysterious and inexplicable were best managed by magical or religious means now seems to have waned. It may be conceded that where this has happened, it has gone along with a new acceptance, even if halting and elementary, that science was now the way to manage most of life. But to speak of such things demand very careful qualifications. When people talk about the waning power of religion, they often mean only the formal authority and influence of Christian churches. Behavior and belief are quite different matters. No English monarch since Elizabeth I, 4.5 centuries ago, has consulted an astrologer about an auspicious day for a coronation. Yet in the 1980s, the world was amused and perhaps a little alarmed to hear that the wife of the President of the United States liked to seek astrological advice. It seems more revealing, perhaps, that in 1947, the timing of the ceremony marking the establishment of Indian independence was only settled after appropriate consultation with the astrologers. Even though India has a constitution that is non confessional and theoretically secular. Around the world, too, confessional states or established religions are now unusual outside Muslim countries. This need not mean, however, that the real power of religious belief or of religions over their adherents has declined. The founders of Pakistan were secular minded, westernized men, but in a struggle with the conservative ulema after independence, they lost. Pakistan became an orthodox Islamic state and not a secular democracy on Western lines, which simply respects Islam as the religion of the majority of its people. It may well be true that today more people give serious attention to what is said by religious authorities than have ever done so before. There are more people alive after all. Many people in England were startled in the 1980s when Iranian clergymen denounced a fashionable author as a traitor to Islam and pronounced a sentence of death upon him. It was a surprise to young peasant and progressive circles to discover that, as it were, the Middle Ages were still in full swing in some parts of the world, without their having noticed it. They were even more startled when numbers of their Muslim fellow citizens appeared to agree with the fatwa. Fundamentalism, though, is a word borrowed from American religious sociology. Within Christian churches, too, it expresses a protest against modernization by those who feel threatened and dispossessed by it. Nevertheless, some believe that here, as elsewhere, Western society has indicated a path that other societies will follow, and that conventional Western liberalism will prevail. It may be so. Equally, it may not be. The interplay of religion and society is very complex, and it is best to be cautious that the numbers of pilgrims traveling to Mecca have risen dramatically may register a new fervor or merely better air travel facilities. Alarm has been felt recently over the vociferous reassertion of their faith by Muslims. Yet Islam does not seem able to avoid cultural corruption by the technology and materialism of the European tradition, though successfully resisting that tradition's ideological expression in atheistic communism. Radicals in Islamic societies are frequently in conflict with westernized and laxly observant Islamic elites. Islam is, of course, still an expanding and missionary faith, and the notion of Islamic unity is far from dead in Islamic lands. It can still nerve men to action too. United with strong social forces, Religion produced terrifying massacres in the Indian subcontinent during the months of partition of 1947 and in the struggles of 1971, which led to the breaking away of East Bengal from Pakistan to reappear as Bangladesh. The Ulster and Eyre, sectarian Irishmen, still mouth their hatreds and bitterly dispute the future of their country in the vocabulary of Europe's 17th century religious wars, though marginally less violently than at times in the past. Although the hierarchies and leaders of different religions find it appropriate to exchange public courtesies, it cannot be said that religion has ceased to be a divisive force. Doctrine may have become more amorphous, but whether the supernatural content of religion is losing its hold in all parts of the world and is important today merely as a badge of group membership is contestable. What is less doubtful is that within the world whose origins are Christian, which did so much to shape today's world, the decline of sectarian strife has gone along with the general decline of Christian belief and often with the loss of nerve. Ecumenism, the movement within Christianity, whose most conspicuous expression was the setting up of the World Council of Churches, which Rome did not join in 1948, owes much to Christians' growing sense in developed countries that they live in hostile environments. It also owes something to the widespread ignorance and uncertainty about what Christianity is and what it ought to claim. The only unequivocally hopeful sign of vigor in Christianity has been the growth, largely by natural increase in numbers of Roman Catholics. Most of them are now non Europeans, a change dramatized by the first papal visits to South America and Asia in the 1960s and the presence of the 22 archbishops and bishops of African descent at the Vatican Council of 1962. By 1980, 40% of the world's Roman Catholics lived in Latin America, and a majority of the College of Cardinals came from outside Europe. As for the papacy's historic position within the Roman Church, that seemed to be weakening in the 1960s, some symptoms being provided by the Second Vatican Council itself, among other things, registering its work of Aggiornamento or updating for which John the 23rd had asked. It went so far as to speak respectfully of the truths handed down in the teachings of Islam. By 1978, a year of three popes brought to the throne of St. Peter John Paul II, the first non Italian in 4.5 centuries, the first Polish pope, and the first whose coronation was attended by an Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury. His pontificate soon showed his personal determination to exercise the historic authority and possibilities of his office in a conservative sense. Yet he was also the first pope personally to travel to Greece in search of reconciliation with the Orthodox churches of Eastern Europe. The changes in Eastern Europe in 1989, and especially those in his native Poland, owed a great deal to the activism and moral authority of Pope John Paul II. When he died in 2005, after a pontificate that was the third longest in history, he left a mixed legacy. A staunch conservative on matters of doctrine, the Polish Pope had grown increasingly concerned with the materialism that he saw as pervading the contemporary world, not least in the countries he had helped to break away from their communist past. It would be hazardous to project further trends in the history of an institution whose fortunes have fluctuated so much across the centuries as those of the papacy. Up with the Hildebrandine reform, down with the schism and conciliatoryism, up with the Trent, down with the Enlightenment, up with the First Vatican Council. It is safest simply to recognize that one issue, at least, posed by 20th century advances in the knowledge, acceptability, and techniques of contraception may for the first time be inflicting moral and mortal wounds on the authority of Rome in the eyes of millions of Roman Catholics. Half the world. Some of the most influential changes of recent times have still to reveal their full weight and implications. After all, the issue of contraception affects potentially the whole human race, although we usually think about it as part of history of women. But the relations of men and women should be considered as a whole, even if it is traditional and convenient to approach the subject from one side only. Much that settles the fate of many women can nonetheless be roughly measured, and measurement, even at its crudest, quickly makes it clear that great as the level of change has been, it still has a long way to go. Radical change has only taken place in few places and is measurable, if at all, only in the last couple of centuries, even there. Our recognition of the changes has to be very carefully qualified. Most Western women now live lives dramatically unlike those of their great grandmothers, while the lives of women in some parts of the world have been little changed for millennia. Advances in women's political and legal equality with men are easy to trace. A majority of members of the United Nations now accept some measure of female suffrage, and in most Western and other countries, formal and legal inequalities between the sexes have now been under attack for a long time. Prolonged moral questioning of them has led to much compliance with the wishes of egalitarians. The range of legislation attempting to assure equity in the treatment of women has been steadily extended, for instance, into the recognition of disadvantages in employment which had long been ignored. Examples thus set have been noted and influential in non Western countries, even in the teeth of conservative oppositions. This has been a new operative force in changing perceptions, and, of course, it has been all the more influential in a world where women's labor has confronted growing opportunities thanks to technological and economic change. To the huge early opportunities of job they could take, which were provided by textile mill and typewriter, were later added literally hundreds of new roles which women could fill as they mastered other technical skills, and indeed as opportunities of education were increased to meet their needs. Such matters continued to unroll in developing societies in the interconnected, interlocking ways in which they had done so since the industrialization wave began. Even the home was transformed as a place of work. Piped water and gas soon followed by electricity and the possibility of easier management of domestic processes by detergents, synthetic fibers, and prepared foods. While information became available to women as never before through radio, cinema, television, and cheap print. It is tempting to speculate, though, that no such changes arising in more sophisticated societies had anything like the fundamental impact of the appearance in the 1960s of the pill. Thanks to its convenience and the way in which it was used, it did more than any earlier advance in contraceptive knowledge or technique to transfer power over their own lives in these matters to women. It opened a new era in the history of sexual culture, even if that was obvious only in a few societies 3 or 4 decades later. One concomitant in the United States, in particular, was a new feminism that broke away from the liberal tradition in which its predecessors had been rooted. Arguments for traditional feminism had always had a liberal flavor, saying that for women to live unencumbered by laws and customs which were not imposed on men, but only on them, was merely a logical extension of the truth that freedom and equality were good things unless specific cause otherwise were to be shown. The new feminism took a new tack. It embraced a wider spectrum of causes specific to women. A protection for lesbians, for example, laid particular stress on women's sexual liberation and, above all, strove to identify and uncover unrecognized instances of psychological, implicit, and institutionalized forms of masculine oppression. Its impact has varied even within societies and cultures whose elites are susceptible to modernization and its ideas. In some traditional societies, any feminist advance at all has been fiercely contested. In only one respect has there been a widespread and striking change, and it owes as much in specific places to colonialism, communism, and Christianity as to feminism. This is the worldwide retreat of polygamy. Few governments now officially support it. Other institutional expressions of special cultural attitudes towards female emancipation, nonetheless, remain very striking. This is often remarked in Western comments on Muslim ways. Yet, this too is a topic formidably difficult to evaluate. It tempts the observer to subjective and emotional judgment on subjects best not abandoned to quick and generalized reaction. Specification, though, is almost as dangerous as generalization. Only too obviously, the Islamic world remains and maintains restrictions and practices that protect an ultimate male dominance. Many attempts to change this have been thwarted or aborted. Yet, not all Muslim societies impose the veil on their women, and the wearing of the chadar in the Iranian Islamic Republic is not incompatible with successful support by Islamic scholars for defending certain rights for women. Whether such facts turn out to establish sensible compromise or uneasy equilibrium will differ from one Muslim society to another. It should not be forgotten that violent contrasts in what is thought appropriate behavior for women have until recently existed in European societies too. It is not easy to relate such paradoxes as they have sometimes presented to what are supposed to be the uniformities of faith. Principalities and powers. Whether organized religion and the notion of fixed, unchanging moral law have or have not lost some of their power as social regulators. The state, the third great historic agent of social order, at first sight seems to have kept its end up much better. It has never been so widely taken for granted. There are more states, recognized, geographically defined political units claiming legislative sovereignty and a monopoly of the use of force within their own borders than ever before. More people than ever before look to government as their best chance of securing well being rather than as their inevitable enemy. Politics as a contest to capture state power has at times apparently replaced religion, sometimes even appearing to eclipse market economics as the focus of faith that can move mountains. One of the most visible institutional marks left by European world on world history has been the reorganization of international life as basically a matter of sovereign and now, in the name at least, often republican and usually national states. Beginning in the 17th century, this was already in the 19th century beginning to look a possible global outcome, and the process was virtually completed in the 20th century. With it went the diffusion of similar forms of state machinery, sometimes through adoption, sometimes through imposition, first by imperial rulers. This was assumed to be a concomitant of modernization. The sovereign state is now taken for granted, as in many places it still was not even a century ago. This has been largely a mechanical consequence of a slow demolition of empires. That new states should come into being to replace them was scarcely questioned at any stage. With the collapse of the USSR almost a half century after the dissolution of other empires, the global generalization of constitutional language of the sovereignty of the people, representative institutions, and the separation of powers reached its greatest extent.